Namaste. Today, we're going to speak about Dharma. This is our second topic, and it is a very important and a very central topic in the Bhagavad Gītā. This lecture is engaged with Dharma, which is the underlying ethical framework of the Bhagavad Gītā. The concept of Dharma is Vedic, that is grounded in a traditional Varnashrama system. In the previous lecture, I've offered the metaphor of the three-story house in order to describe the structure of the Bhagavad Gītā. Accordingly, the Bhagavad Gītā is divided into three metaphysical tiers, layers, or stories, which could each be described in terms of epistemology, ontology, and ethics. The lower level is humanistic, the second level is spiritualistic, and the third level is liberated. The present lecture argues that the concept of Dharma in the Bhagavad Gītā is subtle, innovative, and unique in that it is grounded in all three levels. As such, it is Dharma that serves as the unifying thread of the entire Bhagavad Gītā. In other words, the entire Gita is committed to Dharma, although this commitment is grounded in different points of view, according to the various ethical and metaphysical levels. As such, the concept of Dharma in the Bhagavad Gita is multi-dimensional. It is grounded in the Vedic humanistic concept. It absorbs yogic elements and becomes karma yoga, and eventually, even when it becomes a liberated form of bhakti or devotion, it still remains or maintains the basic Varnashrama framework. Action or karma comprising karma yoga is not any action. Rather, it is action according to Dharma. This is very important to understand, that the karma of karma yoga is actually action according to Dharma. As such, I argue that the Gita promotes an innovative approach and combines Dharma with yoga, creating the interesting notion of karma yoga, which is at the heart of the Bhagavad Gita, and is one of the central and innovative doctrines of the entire text. A deeper look shows that karma yoga is actually Dharma yoga, a combination of Dharma and yoga, and the two terms are synonymous, in that the term karma does not refer to any action, rather it refers to dharmic action or action according to Dharma. Another argument which I would like to present is that Dharma is holistic or organic, in that it springs from one's own nature. In other words, Dharma is not imposed, it is not external, rather it represents one's essential nature or svabhava. The practice of karma yoga or Dharma yoga undergoes a further sublimation, and ultimately, Dharma assumes a liberated form that combines Dharma and Bhakti to form Bhakti Dharma, as even in the liberated stage of Bhakti, one still adheres to Dharma. As such, it is Dharma that serves as the unifying framework of the entire Bhagavad Gita, as it ties the text together all the way from its lower utilitarian stage through its intermediate yogic stage and eventually up to its bhakti or devotional stage. Let us first try to look at this term Dharma. What is Dharma? It is variously translated as duty, religion, justice, law, ethics, religious merit, principle, and right. These are general translations, trying to capture the various subtleties of the term dharma. It can also be used in terms of teaching or even practice. And it is the main Hindu, if you like, term denoting ethics. And it is based on the notion of duty. If you'd like to look at the Sanskrit, the noun dharma is derived from the verbal root dri, which means to uphold, maintain, sustain, keep in balance. Uphold, maintain, sustain, keep in balance. And hence dharma is the way, the right way to maintain order and balance in the universe. Generally, at the human level, dharma governs every aspect and every activity in the life of a practitioner. In a wide sense, dharma may mean that which supports the world. Dharma is that which supports the world, as duty, morality, and law hold the world firmly together. And as such, dharma is all-encompassing ideology, and all-encompassing ideology that embraces both ritual and moral behavior, and whose neglect will have bad social and personal consequences. Dharma also has a wider universal implication or significance, as it ties together individual ethics, social and political ethics, spirituality, as well as cosmology. It retains the sense of a cosmic status quo, or a healthy and natural universal state of affairs. Dharma is not only external to the human being, rather it is perceived as comprising the essence or nature of everything. As such, it aspires to place everything, not only the human being, but the whole of phenomena, in its proper place. As long as every element in the cosmos, the sun, water, animals, plants, humans in particular, all act according to their dharma, the overall balance, the universal balance, is maintained. However, as soon as any element in the cosmos in some way deviates from its dharma or commits adharma, anti-dharma, the overall balance is disturbed. So now, following this wider universal understanding, dharma should not be thought of as something static, but as a balance that is constantly being struck, which has to be kept. The ethical state represented by dharma is a kind of natural law governing all existent beings in the universe. Accordingly, ethical action is not just a contingent moral act, rather an innate characteristic of a human being, which make him or her what he or she is, assigning the part he is to play in the universal concert. From the wider perspective, it is the dharma of the sun to shine, the pole to be fixed, the rivers to flow, the cow to yield milk, and the Brahmin to officiate and teach, the Kshatriya to rule, the Vaishya to farm. So these are all definitions of dharma, and of course we have adharma, which is the opposite of dharma. Dharma is maintained, in essence, in two ways: by means of performing sacrifices according to Vedic injunctions, and by means of individuals living according to their ritual and social status, and doing what they should do to maintain the optimum level of status quo in the social hierarchy. So now we also have the term Svadharma, which is the individual dharma. The rules of the Svadharma, the individual dharma, were codified in great detail in the text known as Dharma Shastras, or the treatise on dharma duty. And the Vedic exegete Jaimini, working the primary dharma rituals, much older Vedic rituals, he stated that all of the Vedic text constitutes of injunctions, vidis, and he defined dharma as that which should be done. As I mentioned, if you see the point, Dharma is not only external to the human being, rather it is perceived as comprising the essence or nature of everything, also cosmologically and also in the human sense. Dharma actually aspires to establish human society on a solid moral foundation. And as such, it defines the human being through two parameters, which are the professional and the personal statuses, or Varna and Ashrama. Varna is the professional, and Ashrama is the personal. So that's the famous division into 4 Varnas and 4 Ashramas. The 4 Ashramas are the celibate student, brahmachari, householder grihasta, forest hermit, the vanaprastha, and the world renouncer, the sannyasi. And of course the four varnas, that's 4 ashrams, and the 4 varnas are the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, teachers, rulers, merchants, farmers, and artisans and workers. Okay, so here we have the basic frame of a Varna Ashrama, which is the way Dharma is translated into a human society. Now, having said that, having given this brief introduction to Dharma and coming to Varna Ashrama Dharma, let us look at the humanistic level of the Bhagavad Gītā. As I mentioned, the Bhagavad Gītā is divided into 3 levels, and now we're talking about the lower level, the humanistic level. And the humanistic level very strongly propounds Varnashrama Dharma. Now, let me quote. I can share screen so you can see that. With me. Let me quote the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā. I'm quoting the 40th verse. With the dynasty's destruction, the eternal family Dharma is destroyed, and along with Dharma's destruction, Adharma overpowers the entire family. When Dharma overpowers the family, its ladies become corrupt, O Krishna. And when the women become corrupt, there is miscegenation of classes. So here we have a very clear Vedic exposition. This is a very clear concept of what is Dharma and the logic underlying Dharma. Here in the second chapter, we have more of this kind of dharmic, humanistic discourse. Please let me read. I'm reading in the second chapter, verse 31. Considering your own duty, you should not hesitate, as there is indeed nothing better for a Kshatriya than fighting a dharmic war. Happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such an opportunity to fight comes by good luck, as it opens heaven's gates for them. If, however, you will not fight this dharmic war, you will be giving up both your dharma and honor, and so incur evil. Besides that, people will be speaking of you as eternally infamous, and for one who has been honored, this honor is worse than death. The generals will assume that you have withdrawn from the battle out of fear, and thus those who have once esteemed you highly will think little of you. Your ill-wishers will speak many unspeakable words, thus ridiculing your capacity. What could be more distressful than this? Either you will be killed and attain heaven, or having conquered, you will enjoy the earth. Therefore, rise, Kuntiya, resolute for battle. So all this discourse is the humanistic discourse of Dharma. That's the voice of Vedic Dharma, and I will not repeat all that we have read. However, the text continues and offers a very interesting and innovative twist, if you like. And here we have something new. We have humanistic Dharma linked to yoga and rising up to the level of karma yoga. Very interesting. Now we have this famous verse 238, fight for the sake of fighting, regarding alike happiness and distress, gain and loss, victory and defeat, thus you shall not incur sin. Sukha dukhe samaya kritva labalabo jayo jayo, to yudyaiva yudyasva, naivam papa babapsyasi. So that's what we have now, and that is a very interesting development. It may sound as a surprise, and it seems to be disconnected from the previous suggestion, because before we heard that if Arjuna follows Dharma, he may gain Svarga or heaven. And if he will disregard Dharma, he will suffer all kinds of sufferings, papa, eventually hell, naraka. But now there's a shift or change of underlying assumptions. And it seems that the Vedic underlying assumptions have now changed into yogic or Upanishadic underlying assumptions. I hope that you could see the shift occurring here. The text is rising from the first level, from the first humanistic tier of the Bhagavad Gītā into a higher, second, spiritualistic or yogic tier. The Bhagavad Gītā brings us now to the level of yoga. Dharma, the same Dharma, is now becoming a practice of yoga. Very, very interesting. Equal-minded to happiness and distress. It's not Vedic Dharma. That's something else. That's a yogic practice of a Dharma. And it does not aim anymore at Svarga or heaven. Rather now, it starts to aim at liberation. So that is very, very interesting. It's a different mode of following Dharma than what we heard before. No more aiming for Svarga, for heaven, or trying to avoid Naraka or hell. But now we are aspiring for something else. Very, very interesting. It's all within the framework of Dharma. And the very famous 247 verse, your sole entitlement is to perform dharmic activity, not ever to possess its fruits. Never shall the fruit of an action motivate your deed, and never cleave to inaction. Karmani eva dikaraste, ma paleshu kadachana, ma karma pala heturbur, ma te sangastva karmani. Very, very interesting. Adhikara, one's duty, dharmic duty, in a new way. No attachment to the fruit, no right for the fruit, no utilitarian mode of action, but a new yogic mode of action. Here we have karma yoga, and I also call this dharma yoga because that is within the framework of dharma. So I hope that you can follow this very, very interesting, very, very interesting shift in emphasis, how we start looking at Dharma as a yogic practice. And now we have more verses at the same chapter, continuing the same thread of verses, and I'll share a screen again. And look at this. Let's read this together. Oh, Dhananjaya, perform activities while you are fixed in yoga. See, perform activities, dharmic activities apparently, while you are fixed in yoga. Relinquishing attachment, be equally accepting both success and failure. For this equanimity is called yoga. Action is far inferior to Buddhi yoga or enlightened action. Arjuna, seek refuge in this enlightenment, as those motivated by the fruits of their actions are to be pitied. The enlightened person renounces both good and evil deeds here in this world. Therefore, perform yoga for its own sake, as yoga is the skill in action. Yoga karma sukhaushalam. Yoga is the art, the skill in action. Here we have this dharmic activity turning into yoga. The wise who are rooted in this enlightenment relinquish indeed the fruits born of actions. Thus they are freed from the bondage of rebirth and go to that place which is free from pain. When your consciousness has made its way through the dense tangle of delusion, you shall become averse to all that has been heard and all that is to be heard in the Vedas. When you'll be fixed in the unwavering in the face of the perplexing Vedic hymns, your consciousness fixed in unshaken samadhi, then you will have attained to the state of yoga. So that's very interesting. And you can see here how the text builds up the philosophy or the doctrine of karma yoga, how Arjuna is directed to act in a yogic play, in a yogic and detached way, and how I would say yoga enters the discussion of Dharma. I'd like to leave this aside, hopefully return to this later, and now ask the question, what is the source of Dharma? Where does Dharma come from? Is Dharma humanistic? Is it a human invention? What is exactly, where does it come from? And here, I'd like to turn to the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā and quote these very famous verses which point at Dharma's divine origin. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyutanam dharmasya tadatmanam sujam yaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashya cha dushkritam dharma samstapanortaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Indeed, whenever a decline of dharma occurs and a surge of adharma, then I myself appear to rescue the good and the pious, to destroy the evildoers, and to establish dharma. I myself descend age after age. So now we have heard in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā that the origin of dharma is divine. Krishna says that he himself appears to establish dharma. Dharma is of a divine origin. Krishna himself, the Supreme Lord, appears to establish dharma. And that has a purpose, to rescue the good, sadhunam, and the pious, and to destroy the evil, the duskritam, and to reestablish dharma. That's why Krishna appears age after age. So this is a central doctrine concerning dharma in the Bhagavad Gītā. We have more such ideas in the 3rd chapter, but I will skip that. It's interesting. And now I'd like to argue that the words karma and dharma are synonymous. In other words, when the Gita speaks about karma, it's actually dharma. So here we have, I'm returning to this verse, karmani eva adhikaraste. Your sole entitlement is to perform dharmic activities. And let me develop this argument a little more. The word karmani is the plural form of karman, translated as act, action, performance, special duty, occupation, any religious act or rite. The term adhikara, karmani eva adhikaraste, is right, especially to perform sacrifice with benefit. As such, the statement, karmani eva adhikaraste, may be translated as you have a right to perform your religious duties. And here we have a scholar, very famous scholar, J.B. van Buitenen, and he refers to this phrase and writes that entitlement or adhikara is a technical term from Mimamsa. It covers the sum total of those properties such as birth, initiation, and stage of life, as well as specific purpose that qualify and thereby entitle a person to perform a certain act and reap the reward for performances. So that's from Van Buitenen, who's a very famous Vedic scholar. And he writes that he now explains the term adhikara. Remember, karmani eva adhikaraste. So this adhikara, what is this adhikara? And that comes to the sum total of those properties such as birth, initiation, stage of life, which qualify the person to perform a certain act and reap the reward of the performance. So these properties, including initiation and stage of life, certainly that means dharma, if you see my point. Now, Buitenen continues and writes that in referring to the category of set act in Sanskrit, niyatam karma, the only set act that Krishna is interested in here is varnashrama dharma. That's Van Buitenen. Here we have another scholar called Nicholas Sutton, and he's teaching at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, and he writes that karma yoga is based on dharma. That's Nicholas Sutton, and writes that karma yoga that Krishna emphasized in the opening chapters of the Gita is based on the idea of dharma. So here's Nicholas Sutton teaching Bhagavad Gītā at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, and he also shares the same opinion that when Krishna speaks about karma yoga, he actually thinks about a dharma. And H.D. Goswami, Hridayananda Goswami, he sheds light on the meaning of karma and links it to both vocation and nature. Please try to follow this argument by Hridayananda Goswami. And he says that karma is based upon vocation. Vocation is profession, varna, and nature, guna. As such, the word karma has another important sense that gives special meaning to karma yoga. Accordingly, karma often indicates one's natural vocation or duty, and thus, from one's condition within a body, svabhava, comes personal duty or vocation, svakarma. You see, now we are looking at dharma from a different direction. Before, we spoke about Vedic dharma, then we spoke about the divine origin of dharma, and now H.D. Goswami is saying that karma, which indicates one's natural vocation, means one's gunas determine his or her Varna, Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, he says that from Svabhava, from one's nature, comes one's dharma, duty, or vocation, svakarma. I hope that you can follow this argument, which is very important to understand Dharma and the Bhagavad Gītā. As you may recall, I mentioned before that Dharma is holistic, not imposed externally on the human being. Rather, it springs from one's nature. So now I will quote another verse, and that is a central verse concerning Dharma. It's chapter 3, verse 35, very important verse, which also returns almost verbatim at the end of the Bhagavad Gītā. Shriyan svadharmo viguna, parodharmot paradharmat svanushthitat, svadharme nidhanam shriya, paradharmo bhayavaha. Translation: better to be deficient in following one's own dharma duty than to perform another's duty well. Even death, while performing one's own duty, is better for following another's duty. It's better for following another's duty invites danger. Now, let us look into the Sanskrit, and we can see that the term dharma is repeated 4 times in different grammatical inclinations. Shreyan svadharmo, first time, viguna parodharmat, second time, svanushthitat, svadharme, third time, nidhanam shreya, paradharmo, fourth time, payavaha. Now, we can see that this verse, as I mentioned, is repeated almost verbatim at the end of the Bhagavad Gītā. That's 1847. Shriyan svadharmo viguna parodharma svanushthitat svabhava niyatam karma kurva napnoti kilbisham. It's a little different. In the I'll share a screen so you can see actually the subtleties. Slightly different. So see here. First time, Shriyan svadharmo viguna parodharmat svanushthitat. That's quite similar. Shriyan svadharmo viguna parodharmat svanushthitat. Exactly similar. But here, second line, svadharme nidhanam shriya, swabhava niyatam karma. Look at this. Swabhava niyatam karma. Your niyatam karma, the prescribed karma or duty, prescribed karma, niyatam, is svabhava. Kurvan apnoti kilbisham. And 1847, better to perform one's own duty imperfectly than others' dharma perfectly. As when one performs the duties prescribed for his own nature, he incurs no evil. So, we can see that there is a slight difference in framing these 2 verses, which are quite similar, but not exactly. And as you can see in the verses, whereas the first line is identical in both verses, the second line is slightly different. And the term svadharma, one's own dharma, is alternated with the phrase svabhava niyatam karma, prescribed action according to one's nature. In other words, the verse equates the phrase svadharma with the phrase svabhava niyatam karma. That is my point. That is prescribed duty springing from one's nature. You see, svadharma is equated with svabhava niyatam karma. As the phrase niyatam karma is synonymous with the phrase svadharma, you see, niyatam karma is synonymous with Swadharma. This further substantiates the claim that the Gita applies the terms dharma and karma alternatively, and in a wider sense, this serves to substantiate the claim that karma yoga is actually dharma yoga, which is one of the main arguments in this lecture, that karma yoga is actually dharma yoga. Now, we may ask whether karma yoga is a path in itself. So now I'm returning to the second chapter and to the third chapter. And here Arjuna is asking a very important question. It's so important that he asks the same question again at the beginning of the 5th chapter. So let me ask the question, or read that question, which Arjuna is asking. And Arjuna is asking, if you consider enlightenment to be better than action, why then do you enjoin me to perform this terrible act? Your equivocal-like words confuse my mind. I beg you, make me certain of one thing by which I may attain the best. So, I hope you understand the question. In the 2nd chapter, Krishna has argued for self-realization. We didn't read it now because we're reading the Gita thematically, not chapter by chapter, but according to themes, and now we're engaged with the theme of Dharma. But in the 2nd chapter, Krishna has depicted the figure of the sage, the renounced yogi who can withdraw his senses like the turtle withdraws his limbs to the shell, and so forth. These verses which speaks about controlling the mind and the senses and so forth. So Arjuna thought that this means that he should leave the battlefield and go to the forest and do meditation, become a yogi. So that's the question. He says, if you think that enlightenment means going to the forest, doing meditation basically, is better than action means going to the battle fighting. If you think that enlightenment is better, then why do you send me to war? Why do you enjoin me to perform this terrible act? I'm confused. Your equivocal-like words confuse my mind. I'm confused. I beg you, make me certain of one thing by which I may attain the best. I hope you see the point. And also the point in the text itself, the beginning of the 3rd chapter. That's where the question is raised. Why do you send me to battle if you think that going to the forest and becoming a yogi is better? So now, in his answer, Krishna propagates the doctrine of karma yoga and distinguishing it from jnana yoga. And in doing so, he differentiates the path of contemplation, which implies cessation of action, from the path of active engagement, which implies action or karma. Now, this is Krishna's answer. I have propounded since the days of your labors of Arjuna that in this world there are 2 paths. For those who uphold reasoning, it is the path of jnana or intellectual yoga. Whereas for those who uphold action, the path of karma yoga or yoga of activity exists. So here Krishna speaks of 2 spiritual paths, which are jnana yoga and karma yoga. Apparently, karma, in the Vedic sense of leading to heaven, is not mentioned. Rather, it is karma in the sense of a yogic practice, which is a central point. The reference to the 2 schools serves to equate them as 2 possible ways of dealing with the problem of karmic bondage. Such an equation seems especially called for in the new teaching of karma yoga, which is now declared to be path to liberation. This is my point here, that karma yoga is a path in itself to liberation. And it's efficient as the practice of Shankya. That's the chapter focuses on karma yoga, self-control through action, and that allows one to act without experiencing any consequences. And the text continues, not by merely abstaining from acting does one attain actionlessness, and not by renunciation alone does one achieve perfection. So here we have a very interesting term, which is naishkarmyam, or actionlessness. It's not a discussion of non-action or cessation of acting. Rather, it is a discussion of the state of non-actionness, which indicates karma has with no reactions or activity at all. This is not a Vedic state. Rather, this is a yogic state. And here we quote Zehner, very famous scholar of Bhagavad Gītā, Neish Karmyam, freedom from the bonds of works, is actionlessness, worklessness. It is different from a karman or an action, which means doing nothing at all. So now we have the philosophy of karma yoga, but I want to skip that, and I want to speak about Dharma being holistic or springing from one's own nature. How will I do that? Let me discuss now the 17th chapter and say that the Bhagavad Gītā links the Vedic notion of Varnashrama Dharma to the Sankhya Yoga metaphysics. This connection is reflected in the doctrine of Karma Yoga, which connects Dharma and Yoga and offers a new understanding of Dharma as a practice. And now, interestingly, in doing so, the Gita adopts the guna metaphysics and theory of human nature to form a holistic understanding of the Vedic Varna system, according to which one's Varna identity springs from one's nature as defined by the gunas. Consequently, one's Dharma reflects one's nature or existential state called Svabhava. Interesting. Dharma reflects one's constitution of the gunas called Svabhava. The Gita deals extensively with human nature, especially in chapters 14, 17, and 18. A condensed position of this is offered at the beginning of the 17th chapter. Now we're discussing human nature, and the argument is that Dharma springs from human nature. Now I'm reading 17th chapter. Embodied souls are three kinds of faith, Shraddha, originating from their nature, and these are goodness, passion, and darkness. One's faith is according to his essential nature, as the human being is composed of faith. Indeed, whatever his faith is, that's what he is. It's a little complicated, but basically, one is meeting the world, so to speak, according to one's nature or composition of nature. We are considering the world, we are reflecting the world, we are seeing the world through the lens of our gunas. Anyhow, I don't want to stay too long on that, but just to say that two interesting observations may be noted. First, the Dharma seems to be individual, as defined as Svadharma, individual Dharma, not general. My Dharma may be different than your Dharma. And Svadharma is different than Paradharma, the Dharma of the other. And as I mentioned before, Svadharma is equated with Svabhava Niyatam Karma, prescribed duties springing from one's nature, indicating that one's Dharma springs from one's own nature as opposed to being externally imposed. Nicholas Sutton, which I mentioned before, he considers that Dharma is descriptive as well as prescriptive. It's not just what a person ought to do, it is a reflection of a person's inner nature, svabhava, generate as a result of past karma. So I think that, I hope that point is clear, that it is human nature that defines the four varnas. Mind you, four varnas are part of the varna ashrama, and the varnas are emanating from one's nature. So we already mentioned that the Dharma is of a divine origin, and I may quote also this verse, Chatur Varnyam Maya Srishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha, translated as, I have created the four social classes according to the divisions of the gunas and the modes of work. And here you have again this linking of varnas, gunas, and dharma. Accordingly, human beings have specific natures. The natures define their personality, and varna and their particular dharma is derivative of their specific natures and personal constitutions. So, if you like, let's read this very famous section. I'll share screen for this. And here we have these verses from the 18th chapter, speaking about varna, tranquility, self-restraint, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religious piety. Characterize the brahmanas as they spring from his own nature. You see, the varna comes from own nature. Heroism, ardor, determination, expertise, fighting spirit, generosity, and leadership characterize the kshatriya as they spring from his own nature. Agriculture, cow protection, and trade characterize the vaishya as they spring from his own nature. And acts of service mark the shudra as they spring from his own nature. Okay, I skipped that about one being confined or obliged to act according to one's nature. And let me say a few words about the inner vision of karma yoga, and say that when one performs karma yoga, which I have already argued that it is dharma yoga, one has jnana, has knowledge within karma yoga. And here we have a very beautiful section of the 3rd chapter speaking about the vision of the yogi, the karma yogi, who performs dharma yoga. Prakrite kriyamanani gune karmani sarvasha ahankara vimutma kartaham iti manyate. Although actions in every respect are performed by the gunas of material nature, the spirit soul, confused by the ego, thinks it is actually me who is the doer. Kartaham iti manyate. So here we have this very interesting discussion of how one who performs dharma yoga is actually a yogi in visioning that the gunas are active. Now there's another question, it's an interesting question, and it is dharma obligatory for the self-realized? A person may be embodied, have some attachments in many ways, and he or she have to perform dharma. We understand that, hopefully. But what about someone who has attained self-realization? Is that person still in the category of being obliged? Niyatam, he has to undergo Vedic Chodanas. He has to follow the Vedic prescriptions. And this is the question. And Krishna says, now in third chapter, but for one who is delighted in the self alone, and thus self-satisfied and self-content, indeed for him no dharmic duty exists. He is not obliged. She is not obliged. He has no interest to perform any action, but no reason to avoid action either. He needs not depend on any creature. Therefore, ever perform your duties while detached, as one who does so disinterestedly, attains the supreme. So, this is the discussion that one who self-realized is not obliged to perform dharma. However, even if one is self-realized, still one follows dharma. And that's a major argument of this lecture, that the Bhagavad Gītā is dharmic from beginning to end. And I'll read that. I'll share screen so you see it. I'll share screen. It's very, very interesting that I'll skip. Krishna says, even if someone is self-realized, even Arjuna, if you're self-realized, still follow dharma for the sake of giving example. Because 21, whatever a great man does, common men indeed follow. And whatever standard he sets, the whole world accepts. Yad yad ashrati shwesta tada devatalo jana syat pramanam kurute lokastat anuvartate. That's very important. And then Krishna says, 22, O Partha, I myself am not obliged to perform any duty in all three worlds. I'm self-realized and have nothing more to attain. Still, I adhere to dharma. For was I ever to avoid tirelessly doing so? All mankind would follow my path. So Krishna says, I follow dharma to give example for the whole world. Had I ceased adhering to my duties, all these worlds would have perished, and I would have caused miscegenation among the classes, as well as destroyed the hosts of creatures. Just as the unwise perform their duties out of interest, the wise do so disinterestedly, desiring the welfare of the world. Loka sangra. The wise one should not unsettle the ignorant whose minds are attached to different activities. Rather, the wise one should encourage them to perform their duties and thus enjoy all sorts of action while he himself acts in a controlled manner. So here we discussed the idea of the self-realized who doesn't have to follow dharma. Rather, he or she follows for the sake of giving example to the people in general. So now we are coming to the end of this lecture and also the end of Bhagavad Gītā. And now let us discuss dharma at the stage of liberated bhakti. We started from the Vedic ethos. We came up to karma yoga, and I argued that karma yoga is dharma yoga. But now what happens when one reaches the stage of bhakti or devotion, liberated bhakti? What happens then with dharma? What happens then with dharma? And now let's come to this very, very central Charama Shloka. Sarva dharman parityajya mamikam sharanam raja. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone. What do we do with that? I'm saying that the Gita is dharmic from beginning and end. And you may say here, Krishna says, give up dharma, abandon. Parityajya. Abandon dharma. All dharmas. Don't do them. Wow. That's far-reaching, surprising end of the Bhagavad Gītā. So what happens there? So what happens there is also very important. This is no doubt a surprising statement, as the entire Bhagavad Gītā reinforced time and again from various and different points of view the principles that one should adhere to his or her dharma duties. So this statement is no doubt surprising. However, having heard this, and apparently from a liberated position of pure devotion or bhakti, Arjuna says what? Karishye vachanam tava. Or I should do as you say. Apparently having ascended the ethical ladder, which I'll elaborate later about it, and reached its liberated peak by surrendering to the Supreme in deep devotion and being free from the need or obligation to follow Dharma. Arjuna now follows the Kshatriya Dharma out of a state of pure devotion. In other words, having surrendered to Krishna in full devotion, he now wants to give up any considerations other than pleasing Krishna. As such, and in this mindset, he makes the statement, Karishye vachanam tava, I should do as you say. And adhering to his dharma, he prepares himself for battle as a service to Krishna. This indeed concludes the Gita's position regarding dharma. It is dharmic from beginning to end, or from the lower stages of the ethical ladder all the way to its peak and culmination. So let me please briefly summarize this chapter or this lecture, better we call chapter lecture, never mind. And it seems that Dharma is not merely a socio-political organization, rather it is of a divine origin and therefore sacred. The term karma, as applied in the phrase of karma yoga, is indeed synonymous with dharma. And a closer look shows that action or karma comprising karma yoga is not any action but prescribed duty or action according to dharma. As such, karma yoga could also be referred to as dharma yoga. Karma yoga actually is a path in itself and may be compared to the path of jnana yoga in its soteriological potential. However, in the Gita, it is recommended that as a superior path, and various arguments are presented to this effect, especially at the beginning of chapters 3 and 5. Moreover, despite the path of karma yoga being externally active, it is actually adheres to the idea of nivritti, or actionlessness, and it is even argued that actionlessness can better be achieved by karma yoga, which represents pravritti, than by jnana yoga, which represents nivritti. In comparing the path of karma yoga to other paths leading to liberation, such as the path of yoga or the Upanishadic path of jnana, it is apparent that all of those paths indeed lead to liberation through detachment. However, the path of karma yoga is unique in that it aspires to achieve nivritti through action or through pravritti. Dharma is holistic in that it is not an external imposition, rather it corresponds and springs from one's own nature. It is individual, and as such the term Swadharma is applied. Apparently, the notion of human nature is closely linked to both karma yoga and dharma, as one's dharma springs from one's nature and karma yoga is performed accordingly. Despite this understanding, one's nature is stronger than one's ability to change it, and as such, one is confined to follow his or her nature. As karma yoga is a yogic path, it involves a vision according to which it is nature acting, but not the individual soul. Dharma is obligatory for those maintaining a humanistic conception of life, but it is not obligatory for one who has transcended this conception. However, and despite this, those in that category, the liberated and self-realized, still follow Dharma in order to give an example to the people in general for the welfare of the world, Loka Sangra. At the stage of full devotional surrender, one is called to give up all dharmas, but still, even at that stage, one follows dharma out of devotion for the Supreme. Thank you very much.